Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Weather is top of mind this week. A lot of Oklahoma wheat fields are so wet that top dress of nitrogen on wheat fields is behind schedule. SUNUP's Curtis Hare talks with Precision Nutrient Management Specialist Brian Arnall for some guidance.
Usually this time of year, it's the time that producers are wrapping up with top dressing, but Brian, the weather hasn't really been conducive for that. So what can producers do in this interim period?
So right now, as we just got wet, you see all the water behind us flowing through the fields. We're saturated, we're wet. A lot of people don't have their top dress on because it's been so wet. We need to be making sure that we have our plans ready to go forward. We know it seems late, this time of year, like you said, we're already done with our top dress majority of our acres, and many of them haven't had any nitrogen. It's not too late, and I want to stress that even on our dual purpose or grazing wheat, we're past hollow stem, we still have a little bit of time to fertilize that ground. And on our grain only, we're not to hollow stem yet. We have time to get rigs across the field, get nitrogen on, and have good benefit. Our recent research at Oklahoma State University shows that nitrogen can be applied at or even after hollow stem and receive full benefit of the nitrogen you use, and even result in a better quality end-use quality because of our protein content, because we're applying it closer to when the plant actually needs the nitrogen.
What type of applications should producers be thinking about to be applying?
So it's kind of a one hand and the other. One hand, you have you want to be as efficient as possible as far as the nutrient and the nitrogen, but you also have, we need to get it done. So we're balancing the most ease of use and the most efficient. Our two primary options right now are going to be a dry or a liquid. So urea is going to be a good option because spinner spreader capability, if you can get it across ground that has not had hollow stem yet, or you have narrow tires and you cross ground that way. However, we have to be cautious that if we have wet ground like we have out here right now, and we get over wet ground with a dry urea and we don't have rain soon after, we're going to have a lot of losses. That's when we get the most, is when you apply urea to a wet soil, it doesn't rain, we have warm temperatures in the 60s and 70s, and we have wind. So avoid urea if the ground still has a lot of moisture in the top surface. UAN is going to be a good option. You can run with sprayers, that means wide application widths. You can run UAN as either as a flat fan, which gives you small droplets like when you're applying a herbicide, or with streamers, which concentrates that stream down in. Now, on both of those, when you apply the UAN with the flat fan, you can use a herbicide at times. That's a good option to make efficiency of your application use. However, if you have a lot of residue like wheat straw or any kind of dead residue showing, I don't really like the flat fan, because if we don't get rain within a day or two, that UAN can stick to that residue and it will be tied up. Now, it's not lost, but it could be tied up during the wheat's production cycle. Streamer nozzles concentrates UAN into thicker streams and actually pushes it down through that residue. If you don't have residue, either a streamer or a flat fan will work, because you're contacting the wheat or you're contacting the soil, which gets good uptake.
So with the weather being what it is now, and producers do need to wait, is there a margin for error when it is going to be too late?
Yeah, we really start transitioning on too late. As the closer we get after hollow stem, a week or two after hollow stem, we're still pretty good. The closer we get to boot, we're losing. The closer we get to flag leaf, we're losing yield potential. Now, I've also shown that if you're deficient, you can apply nitrogen up to flag leaf and get a yield response. However, you have lost your top end for sure. So it depends. If you have yellow wheat, apply nitrogen all the way through flag leaf. If you have green wheat, then walk away. That's also where the enriched strip comes into play. If you have an enriched strip out there, you understand whether you have an end response or it's just something else.
All right, thanks, Brian. If you would like some more information on fertilizer applications, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
I think it goes without saying that all of this rain over the past few months, 6 months now, has really helped the moisture across the state. And Jason, is this a good time for those folks that are thinking about making that conversion from conventional till to just go ahead and do a no-till system?
Yeah, particularly if they're looking at rotation to a summer crop. No-till is very much more successful when we have a crop rotation. and rotate into a summer crop out of a wheat, like fallen graze out or something like that, will be a good option for guys to break that cycle of pests that's in their wheat. And with the moisture we have, particularly in central and eastern Oklahoma, we've been very well blessed with good moisture. Even out west, if you look at the last 6 to 12 months, we've been very blessed. Mm-hmm. Although there are areas, along the Texas border that are getting dry, in general, we're pretty moist.
And there's actually a way for producers, the Mesonet site is one way of knowing your soil moisture, but there's a way for producers to check it on their land.
Yeah, the Mesonet is outstanding. It gives you a sense of the soil moisture under like native warm season grasses. But if you want to go out and really assess your cropland, you really need to do a site-specific evaluation, because the evapotranspiration and all that's going to be different on cropland depending on what kind of crop is grown in the past and what you're growing there now. And what I use is a simple rod. And so here in Stillwater, we can pull this. We were able to push this rod 5 feet in the ground.
Wow.
And I think this is a Norge clay loam, silty clay loam. At depth, it's going to have a good amount of clay in it. But this soil could easily hold 2.5 inches per foot. So that means it's got 12.5 inches of moisture, plant available moisture in it, is what we can estimate from this.
So if a producer wants to know an estimate for their soil moisture, they have a measuring device like that, but it's also important to know your soil type.
Yeah, so sandier soils are going to have lower capacity to hold moisture. If you could push a rod in a sandy soil like this to 5 feet, it's probably going to have half of the water holding capacity that this has, so it may have 5 or 6 inches of total plant available water. And then your loams are going to be upwards, to 2.5, 3 inches per foot. And so the deeper you can push it, the more water you have. And a lot of guys will say, well, I can't push it that deep. And I say, well, because of compaction.
Right.
And if you have compaction where an adult man can't push this in the ground, that's probably the depth of rooting or effective water extraction that you're going to have. And so that's how much moisture you're really going to have for that crop.
And that brings up a good question. Different crops require different soil depths, but kind of take us through what would be a good soil depth for producers to shoot for with soil moisture.
Well, the deeper the better. And so it's really, like I say right now, we're blessed with a good historic rainfall for the last, the winter months. And so in general, we're going to be pretty moist. Even in those wheat fields in far western Oklahoma, if they picked up some rains back in September and it didn't all run off, then they're going to have stored that moisture. And so you may even be dry at the surface, but if you can push through that surface and then get to the subsoil that's moist, then you can really assess what your potential is, given that we hopefully continue to get some rain through the spring to get you to the full rooting depth of that crop.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason Warren, Soil and Water Conservation Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Welcome to the weekly Mesonet Weather Report. There have been a couple of widespread rain events that moved across the state this week. On Wednesday, March 13th, a fast-moving front brought rain to every Mesonet station. The tip of the Panhandle received less than 1/10 of an inch at Kenton and Boise City, while the center of the state received over an inch. Acme in southern Grady County topped the chart with 1.78 inches. If we look back for the past 7 days, we see some pretty good rainfall totals. The usual wettest part of the state came in with 3.12 inches at Broken Bow, while the Panhandle only received 21 hundredths. Cumulative rainfall is where each rainfall event is stacked on top of the others. Cumulative rainfall for the entire state since the start of the year has been slightly ahead of schedule since early January. The blue fill line shows the long-term cumulative average, while the red line shows the amount actually received in 2019 to date. Gary is up next to talk more about this year's precipitation.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, as Wes mentioned earlier, the great rains we had this week certainly did a lot of good for farmers out across western Oklahoma and the other parts of the state as well. Settled the dust, even though we had a lot of wind. We didn't have a lot of the blowing dirt, and also did wonders for our drought picture. Let's go straight to the drought monitor map and see what we have. Now looks worse than it actually is because our cutoff for considering precipitation for the drought monitor ends on Tuesday morning, and Wednesday was the day we had the big rains across the state. So we have that little bit of abnormally dry and moderate drought out across far western Oklahoma. So while the drought monitor still shows a little bit of drought, a little bit of dry conditions, not necessarily going to be there next week. And it looks even better on the consecutive days with less than a quarter inch of rainfall map from the Mesonet. Almost the entire state is now under a week with days without at least a quarter inch of rain. The only places left would be out in the far western panhandle, and hopefully they can get some in the next week or so and get their color back to green on this map, but we've certainly made improvements in this map as well. Now as we look at the amounts from the year to date, so the beginning of the year to the current date on the Mesonet, this is basically a climatological rainfall map for the state because it shows the lesser amounts across western Oklahoma, increasing dramatically as we get into eastern Oklahoma. So 2 inches plus across western Oklahoma, greater than a foot in some areas across southeastern Oklahoma, 8 to 10 inches as we go farther north. And again, that's about where you would expect us to be. Now, if you look at that departure from normal, we've certainly diminished a lot of those deficits that we had throughout the last 60 to 90 days that were growing and causing those drought concerns across southwestern Oklahoma. So a lot of the state has diminished their deficits, diminished their drought worries, and we're really looking good right now, especially considering that spring is on its way. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
We're here with Derrell Peel, our livestock marketing specialist. And Derrell, let's kind of start with just an overall look at how the cattle markets are right now and whether they're following seasonal patterns at this time.
Yeah, you know, so far this year, I think our general expectation for the year is that cattle markets will be in kind of a sideways pattern. So no real trend up or down. And when that happens, we would expect to see the seasonal patterns follow pretty closely. So, and we're seeing that right now. If you look at the lightweight calves or stocker cattle, they've been trending up since January. We're probably close to a seasonal peak here in late March, early April. The bigger feeder cattle, 7 and 8 weight kind of cattle, actually have a seasonal low, and we've seen that as well. We've seen those prices for those 8 weight steers weaken a little bit here. For fed cattle, again, we normally see a seasonal peak towards the end of the first quarter, and we've been struggling a little bit to get up to that. In fact, given the weather problems we've had, I think a lot of people are a little frustrated that we haven't seen more seasonal strength, but it's there. So we're mostly following that seasonal pattern at this point.
Let's look at the weather a little bit more. Winter has really dug in some areas and hung on. How is the weather impacting the markets?
You know, it's sort of two issues here. One is the weather having enough impact broadly to impact market prices and so on. And I think, we're seeing a little of that in the fed cattle market again, and certainly probably in the box beef market. We've had some difficulty getting cattle out of wheat pasture. It's been muddy and sloppy. And I think that's the real issue for cattle producers, both out in the country as well as in feedlots. There's a lot of management issues here, whether or not it translates into overall market impacts. These wet, sloppy conditions, we're calving now. A lot of spring calving cows calving right now, and these are very challenging conditions to get baby calves on the ground.
Now, the USDA recently released the final trade data for 2018. How would you summarize the cattle and beef trade data for last year?
You know, it took a while to get this. We've had some delays, right. but we finally got it. And we had a very good year. Trade was very beneficial for cattle markets last year. Exports overall were up over 10%. And imports were steady, just fractionally higher. So the net effect there was a very positive move to, again, absorb this increasing supplies that we've seen over the last couple of years. But overall, we've seen good strength, good growth in our markets to Japan, South Korea, Mexico, all major markets for us, and they were all up last year.
And what's your take on the first quarter of 2019 so far?
Well, again, we're still waiting for data. We're still playing catch up. We've got a little bit more to catch up with the trade data, but it looks like we've continued pretty well. Again, there's certainly some concerns about potential trade disruptions, but from a cattle standpoint, we haven't seen a lot of that yet. So at this point in time, it looks pretty positive.
Okay, thanks a lot, Derrell. We'll see you again soon.
As we go through this or any calving season, I think it's important to remind producers that they want to keep a good record of any multiple births that took place in their herd, especially if they have a situation where a heifer calf and a bull calf are born twin to each other, or in the case of triplets, if there's multiple sexes within those three calves. What we're concerned about is that heifer calf born twin to a bull will, in over 95% of the cases, be incapable of reproducing as she grows up to eventually be a 2-year-old, 3-year-old cow. This is a condition called free Martinism, and it occurs as these embryos are being developed in a common uterus, and around day 40 of the pregnancy, that's when you might see some intermingling of the fluids and the blood in that one placenta, where the male calf is actually developing a little bit sooner than the female, and therefore there might be some cells or some hormones being produced by that male embryo that greatly influence the underdevelopment, if you will, of the female reproductive tract. And that's why then these heifer calves born twin to bulls may look normal, but upon real close examination, you'd find that they have what we call an infantile or underdeveloped reproductive tract, and would be incapable of breeding if we, by some mistake, would keep them as replacement heifers. Now, some people might be concerned about where in the embryo transfer industry, there might be, there's certainly multiple embryos being produced at any one flush, and some of those, of course, will be male and some female. But in the case of embryo transfer, the transfer is actually taking place at about day 7 after insemination or breeding, long before this differentiation of about 40 days between the male and the female embryo would take place. And so there's no concern as far as the health, the normal viability of female embryo transfer calves being born in a flush with male calves. I think the important thing for most producers is, again, to write down in their record book, if they have a set of twins, and especially if one of those is a heifer and the other is a bull, write that heifer calf's number down so that you don't make the mistake of keeping her, spending the money to develop her as a replacement heifer, and then finding out that she's incapable of breeding. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Wool sheep are popular breeds in Oklahoma, but can present some challenges given our very hot summers. However, there might be some other options to consider, as researchers found in some recent studies at Oklahoma State University.
We actually got into the hair sheep business about 6 years ago. And so we're doing a couple of research projects here. We're basically looking to see if we have any parasite-resistant genetics. We know that the St. Croix breed is fairly parasite-resistant, or at least tolerates it better. So we're looking if we have any individuals within this whole flock out here that are very parasite-resistant, and so far we've been very pleased. We're also doing a comparison of rotational grazing versus consistent grazing or constant grazing to see if the differences in rotational grazing will reduce the parasite load. Well, even our wool breeds that we have out here are mostly raised for meat in this state. The difference is, though, that they handle the colder temperatures extremely well, but they don't handle the heat and humidity that we have in the summer, and that's where the hair sheep have worked extremely well.
So as far as management on the hair sheep, it's way less intense. The wool sheep that we have at the barn, we have to be with them quite a bit, especially during lambing season. So we will actually do night checks at times and pull sheep if we need to, or deliver sheep, put them in jugs, things like that, and manage them much more intensely. These hair sheep out here are much more of a commercial setting.
We manage it more like we handle a cattle operation. Basically, yeah, we're there. We watch them every once in a while at lambing time to make sure there's not any problems. But for the most part, they're on their own. Just like that mature cow or that brood cow will do a good job of getting her calf up and taking care of her. The same thing goes on with these girls, and we really don't worry about them very darn much. They work extremely well because they are very heat tolerant and somewhat parasite tolerant.
So as far as the wool sheep, we'll actually shear most of the lambs at the barn. We actually haul our sheep to a sheep shearer, pay him $5 to $7 a head to actually shear those ewes twice a year. Mainly just to keep them cool. Heat stress is real. Oklahoma is obviously a very hot state, and there's times where, you know, if the wind don't blow enough, that there are times that those wool breeds can get heat stress, and that becomes an issue.
Well, basically our wool sheep, if you lambed in April and May around here, you're going to have a 5 to 10% death loss throughout the summer because they don't handle the heat and humidity well at all.
These guys out here in this pasture, they love it. The hotter and drier, the better.
The only real parasite that we deal with are internal parasites, and really the biggest one is the roundworm. It's just the common roundworm. It is a huge problem in the goat industry around here. It is a huge problem in the wool sheep industry around here, and we have to deworm as much as every 60 days when we go through the summer, whereas these hair sheep and the projects that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, basically we're deworming about 4 or 5 out of these 70 or 80 ewes during the summertime, and that's about it. The biggest thing is with the strength of our Bermuda grass pastures and our summer forage in the state of Oklahoma, the hair sheep are made perfectly for that. The fact that they are somewhat parasite resistant, I'm not saying they're parasite resistant, but somewhat resistant is a huge positive as compared to our wool breeds out there. So there are some real positives with the summer forage that we have available in the use of hair sheep.
It wouldn't be a SUNUP program if we didn't ask him, where are we at with the price of wheat right now?
What do you look at what's went on in the market over, say, the last month and a half? We've taken $1 off that KC July wheat price. The basis has increased a little bit, but this last week we got a 23-cent positive price move in one day. I mean, we hadn't had that in some time. So overall, we've got $1 to 80 cents lower prices right now.
So what's causing, yet again, even lower prices?
Well, we can blame it on a lot of things. I think one of the big factors is your managed money funds, those speculators on soft red winter wheat. They're short over 72,000 contracts. That's 362 million bushels. Hard red winter wheat's a record short position by the funds. Almost 47,000 contracts. That's 234 million bushels of wheat that they're short on right now. And as they got into those short positions, a light volume in the market, and it just drove prices down. Another factor, I think, is the dollar. You know, the index of the dollar got over 97% there. It has dropped off the last week, and I think that's probably one reason we had a little rally.
Last week and the week before, you've been really talking about the forward contract prices. Is it worth forward contracting right now?
I don't think so. There's a lot can happen between now and the harvest. You can forward contract in most of Oklahoma around $4.30 a bushel, you know, plus or minus 15 or 20 cents. In the Panhandle, it's $4.20. The basis in most of Oklahoma is a minus 20 cents, somewhere in that vicinity below that July contract. And you got the Panhandle that's a minus 30 cents.
So taking all of that information and then looking at first hollow stem approaching across Oklahoma or moving its way across Oklahoma right now, is it worth financially, is it worth pulling cattle off the wheat or grazing the wheat out? Well,
I think it's more than a quote financial position. If you've had those cattle on there all winter, and if they're on there they have been, then what weight are they? You got to put a pencil to it, and I'd even make it more simple. Are you a cattleman or are you a wheat producer? If you're a cattleman, you'll probably want to keep the cattle out there, and you probably got lightweight cattle in that you can carry them through, and that might be a smart thing for you to do. If you're a wheat producer, and I'm talking about wheat producers that average 40, 50, maybe even 60 bushels per acre, you probably want to stay with wheat because that's where your expertise is, that's where you can make your money, and that's where you're going to make your money over time. Also, as I said, it's a long time between now and harvest. Yeah, it's a few months, but we make this crop in March, April, and May time period. We can either increase yield quite a bit or decrease yield quite a bit. Price can change. You know, we took $1 off in a month and a half. We can put $1 back on there in a couple weeks if the situation turns. So a lot can happen right now, but it boils down to what do you like to do and what does your pencil say, or computer say in this case, you should do.
Okay, thank you very much. Great advice. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Air fryers are a popular new kitchen appliance that you may have heard about, but how are they like and different from deep fat fryers? Both air fryers and deep fat fryers have a compartment or chamber that holds the food, and both have some source of heat that cooks the food. For deep fat fryers, that heat source comes from below and is often some type of electrically powered coil or element, but can also be a gas-powered flame. The heat source for an air fryer is also an electrically powered coil or element. However, it typically sits above the food. Air fryers have one additional component the deep fryers don't, and that's a fan that sits immediately above or sometimes to the side of the heating element. The most noticeable difference between deep fat fryers and air fryers is how they cook. Deep fat fryers use a significant amount of oil to conduct energy between the heating element and the food. Air fryers, on the other hand, use forced air to conduct energy between the heating element and the food. And while it's possible to cook food in an air fryer without any oil, for best results, it's often suggested to spray a small amount of oil across the surface of the food. So are the finished foods identical? Not necessarily. Foods that have already been partially cooked, such as French fries or chicken strips from the grocery store, are more likely to have similar results between the two cooking methods. For foods prepared in an air fryer, they're not going to be necessarily identical in every way compared to foods in a deep fat fryer. However, the air fryer will use less fat. For more information, please visit sunup.okstate.edu or fapc.biz or download the FAPC app.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime on our website at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.